The Flying Scotsman, film star, thoroughbred, and the people's favourite. The world's most famous locomotive is a vital part of our rich railway tradition. Now it's beginning a new phase in its 81-year history. 2 months ago, it appeared this priceless national asset might be sold abroad. But after a nail-biting auction, Scotsman was saved for the nation. Now, Flying Scotsman is finally coming home. At a loco shed in Southall, West London, Flying Scotsman is having a makeover. Soon, it will be going home to Yorkshire as a star attraction in York's Festival to celebrate 200 years of the railways. But the journey north is more than a 200-mile pull for the old engine. Will it get there?
For as long as I can remember, really, this thing has always come first in my planning of what I was going to do.
No one knows Scotsman better than engineer Roland Kennington, who's kept it company for the last 18 years.
That's spot on. Actually, that's very good now.
But this time, he's really got problems meeting his deadline to get the engine ready for the Railway Festival.
Right, we've had quite a few problems during this period of maintenance, and they've mainly centred around the middle driving wheels, but also with the boiler. And we've got a very tight deadline to meet, and in fact, the amount of work we've got to do in total is such that there really isn't a minute to spare. So we're up against it, as they say.
Roland has had to detach a pair of huge driving wheels and repair the axle boxes. But the job's taking longer than expected, and Scotsman's a week behind schedule. Roland gets a surprise visit from Alan Pegler, who single-handedly saved the Flying Scotsman from the scrap heap in 1963.
The biggest problem has been this axle box on this side here, which ran hot on the test run on March the 2nd.
41 years ago, I saved the locomotive from getting scrapped. And so I'm absolutely thrilled that it's finally got a permanent home, and I think the nation are very delighted with it as well. I would have been heartbroken if it had gone abroad. I think it would have been a terrible thing for it to happen. And I'm very, very delighted that that has not happened.
If the Scotsman makes it to York, it will join historic engines brought in by road and rail from the length and breadth of Britain. They're assembling for a festival at the National Railway Museum. The Flying Scotsman is an engine built at the height of engineering excellence, the culmination of a rich railway tradition. But the story of the Scotsman and all locomotives began 200 years ago. In 1804, the Penydarren locomotive trundled into history at 4 miles per hour.
The Penydarren was a beast of an engine. It has a special place in our hearts, the first ever railway locomotive.
The Penydarren was built by Richard Trevithick. He was an engineering genius, but doomed to die in obscurity.
I will see my locomotives proclaimed a success, or the devil take me!
Richard Trevithick was a giant of a man. The son of a Cornish tin miner and a bit of a dullard at school, he blossomed in later life to become one of the finest engineers this country has ever known, the unsung father of the railways.
Built because of a wager between 2 rival ironworks entrepreneurs, the Penydarren had to haul 10 tons of iron ore for 9.5 miles along a tramway in South Wales.
See the crowds! The whole valley has turned out! Aye, they've changed their tune. They called me a madman when I did at first arrive.
Despite destroying part of the tramway, the Penydarren crashed its way into history.
My engines find favour with the public now, I think. See how she moves, so smooth and strong, at 4 miles in the hour!
But back in York, how was a Scotsman saved for the nation? A remarkable groundswell of public opinion helped launch a nationwide appeal. Led by the National Railway Museum, battle was waged. $2.5 million was raised, nearly $500,000 donated by the general public to keep the Scotsman in Britain.
To announce that the National Railway Museum has been successful in preserving Flying Scotsman for the nation.
Sir Richard Branson pledged to match any donations made by the public.
It just had to be saved, that it would just be too sad to see it, disappear out of this country forever. I think what was fantastic was just the amount of people who put their hands in their pockets. I mean, kids, old people, all sorts of people.
The successful campaign to prevent Scotsmen falling into foreign ownership was skillfully handled, with some brinkmanship.
The valuation of the Flying Scotsman was between 1.5 million and 2.5. The style of campaign we led was a very aggressive campaign, and that was partly to show to the public who were donating £5, £50 that we were going to support their donations with an aggressive campaign and in effect blow the opposition out of the water.
The big checkbooks of the American museums, I'm afraid have taken too many, wonderful things away from Britain. So anyway, decided to, intervene and try to make sure it stayed here.
In the final weeks of the campaign, we already had a very healthy war chest built up for the Flying Scotsman, and Sir Richard Branson coming on board allowed us to push the bid over the £2 million mark, and that's what made us confident of success.
Well, I was very delighted because, in fact, the head of the museum was kind enough to phone me at home on the Sunday night and tell me.
In 200 years of railway history, the Rocket was a genuine ancestor of the Flying Scotsman, the first modern locomotive. This was a real family effort, built by George Stephenson and his son Robert.
The Stephensons were very clever engineers. They used a lot of other people's designs in a new and innovative way. The father, George Stephenson, had been involved more with stationary engines, and Robert developed the ideas that came along. So not original ideas, but very, very clever stuff. The reason Rocket was such a special locomotive, it had what we call a multi-tube boiler. Now this is much more efficient at making coal into steam. This cylinder drives straight down onto the driving wheel, no complicated mechanisms. And up at the front of the engine we have what we call a blast pipe, which uses the exhaust steam, fires it up the chimney, and that draws cold air through the fire grate and makes more steam more efficiently.
The Rocket had already created a sensation at the Rainhill trials in 1829, outperforming all its competitors. The prize was £500 and a contract to build locomotives for the world's first passenger railway, the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. The opening day of the railway didn't disappoint. Rocket completed the journey in record time, consigning the horse and trap to history. Among the passengers was the first celebrity railway anorak, actress Fanny Campbell, whose letters revealed she had taken more than a shine to George Stephenson.
Mr. George Stephenson was the name upon every person's lips.
700 invited guests, 8 special trains on the inaugural opening day of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. The then Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington, was on hand to do the honours. A massive crowd, brass bands, all come along to see people riding at the unprecedented speed of 30 miles per hour.
You cannot conceive the sensation of cutting through the air. The motion is smooth. The wind weights my eyelids down, and with one's eyes closed, the sensation is like flying!
The rail boom took off. Over the next 40 years, tracks are laid, stations built, steam is everywhere. Even underground. 200 years ago, workers began moving to be near factories and mines. The Clecmed slate mines in North Wales were served by a narrow-gauge railway which carried the slate. The Festiniog Railway was said to have roofed Britain. When the wheels of the Industrial Revolution were in full swing, the steam engine was the ultimate machine. Alan Pegler is returning to the Festiniog he loves for a special birthday.
Ladies and gentlemen, to the father of railway preservation and all his disciples. To Alan.
First travelled on it, I suppose, 1954.
Right.
But I didn't travel on it myself until after it got control. Way back, 50 years ago, yeah.
Alan's record is extraordinary. As well as saving the Scotsman, he also rescued the Festiniog Railway. And today is the 50th anniversary, which he's celebrating with a group of friends.
He's always regarded as the father of railway preservation.
Yes, I mean, in terms of its place in history, if you like, I'd place it very, very high in terms of railway achievement and innovation over the last 200 years.
This is one of the most commercially important railways ever built, proving that small can be beautiful. Narrow gauge lines and small trains could still haul heavy loads, a formula that was exported by Britain all over the world.
This railway helped move millions of tons of slate from the slate mines in Blaenau Festiniog down to the port here at Portmaddock, where from here the slate was shipped all over the UK and indeed throughout the empire, and it was the railway that pretty much roofed Britain.
Well, it's unique. I mean, it's the oldest narrow gauge line in the world. So being a narrow gauge line, it can get around sharper curves than a standard gauge line can. And it's got many, many features about it that are special to this particular railway.
Back in London, the Scotsman's facelift is gathering pace, but Roland's got his work cut out to complete the repairs in time. The axle boxes are finally ready, so the wheels are dropped into a pit. The massive engine can now be reversed over the pit. When the Scotsman's positioned dead centre above the axle, the wheels can finally be raised into position. There's also been problems with the Scotsman's boiler, so there's no guarantee the engine will be finished on time. But Roland remains optimistic.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. Be a struggle, but we'll get there.
The Flying Scotsman was built in Doncaster in 1923 at a cost of £7,944. The following year, it was displayed at the Great Empire Exhibition.
The first big engine I ever saw close up. It was at the Wembley Exhibition 1924, and I was the tender age of 4 years old, and I've never forgotten the impression it made on me then.
The experience of being up here is quite indescribable, really, to someone who's never experienced it. It's noisy, it bounces about, it's quite violent in some respects, and if it hits a bad piece of track, it can throw you from one side of the cab to the other. But it's fantastic.
Oh no, personality is absolutely right. They do have personalities, these engines, and they can be a little bit temperamental, and they have to be looked after nicely and treated well.
Over the next 40 years, it travelled over 2 million miles, much of it from London to Edinburgh via York.
Basically, it has been a Yorkshire engine. It was built there, it's been through Yorkshire and to York many, many times.
I'm delighted that it's going to Yorkshire and that it's going to the city of York.
But how was York transformed from an historic market town into a centre of the railway industry? Mainly through the influence of one man, George Hudson, the Railway King. Hudson exploited his business and political contacts to bring the railways to York. By the 1840s, York was already linked to London, making the stagecoaches obsolete. Today, many York families can trace their railway routes back 3 generations.
Oh yes, the railways made York. It was like what George Hudson said, they thought railways come to York. And they did. My grandfather came down from Darlington and he worked in the carriage works. He was a cabinet maker. My father was a railway clerk in the passenger managers. One of his other sons was in the estate office, and a son-in-law of his was a signalman. And myself. And then my husband's, he worked on the railway, of course. His grandfather, one of his grandfathers, was an engine driver, and he drove a train in Bolivia.
Scotsman's journey north from King's Cross was traditionally a fast route. The locomotive was flying. Although Scotsman left its mark in history as the first engine to reach 100 miles an hour, the city of Truro unofficially broke the record 30 years earlier. The Truro, seen here reenacting its record attempt, was doomed never to leave its mark on the record books. The speed measurement was made too crudely and couldn't be authenticated. So the 100-mile-per-hour barrier remained until 1934, when the Scotsman touched 100 and set itself on track to be the world's most famous locomotive.
There are lots of other people who say that their locomotives did speeds of that amount or even more, but the authenticated 100 was Flying Scotsman.
Right, well, the controls are fairly basic. Boiler pressure gauge here, which is the fireman's responsibility. These 2 handles are for injectors. These are the things that you put water into the boiler with. Over this side, we've got a steam chest pressure gauge, which tells you how much steam is going into the cylinders. Next to it is the speedometer in miles per hour.
But even the Scotsman's record was shattered by this locomotive, the fastest steam locomotive ever built.
This is the steam locomotive Mallard. It was built in 1938 in what's seen by some as one of the first skirmishes of the Second World War. It took the speed record from the Germans. Mallard did 126 miles an hour. That's a world record for steam that still stands today.
In wartime York, the railways changed people's lives in fundamental ways.
I worked on the station. I worked in the telegraph office and on the switchboard, of course. And one night, this gentleman rang me up. He was a soldier it was during the war, obviously. And we got talking, and ultimately we met, and 3 years later we married.
This was Betty Chalmers' route to work at York Station in 1942.
I've walked along here many times to go in that doorway there and up some stairs to the office where the telegraph office and the switchboard was. I was talking down that switchboard when I spoke to my husband for the first time. He rang up. And this is how we did for about 3 months before we met.
So this is quite a romantic
Oh, yes. Place. Oh, yes. Yes. Like brief encounter, isn't it?
During the war, my father was an engine driver, and he used to take the pilots and the military, you know, to the destinations. And we didn't get any warning at all, you know. And all of a sudden they started bombing York, and they came one after another over our house. And my mother said, I bet they're going for the railway.
It was moonlit night, and they followed the river up from Hull, and they got the waterworks, and York Station was terrible.
All of a sudden, the door burst open, and my father had crawled all the way down Skeldergate, and he was black. From head to foot, he was black with soot. And he came in, and he said, all York's on fire. The next morning, my friend and I went to the station to see the damage, and it was absolutely glass all over the place, and there wasn't a thing to be seen. It was all shattered down to the ground.
It was 3 days before my 21st birthday. The girls in the office had collected for a present for me, and the money went down with the bombs.
Winter 1963, and a sad day for steam. The Flying Scotsman makes its last run in British Rail colours from King's Cross to Leeds. Alan Pegler pays £3,000 for the legendary locomotive and saves it from the scrap heap.
Not a question of owning it, a question of saving it, as I thought then, for the nation, to making quite sure that this national icon did not get scrapped. That was the sort of handover of the locomotive into my care, really. The crowd seeing the train off with the Flying Scotsman at the head was absolutely remarkable. I mean, it was midweek, but the station was absolutely packed. You could barely get onto the platforms. It was really a wonderful send-off. And I was lucky enough to be in the cab, rode in the cab all the way to Doncaster, and it was a very, very exciting occasion.
In the 60s, although the age of steam is over, York's railway industry still thrives. The Golden Rails Band is traditionally staffed by railway workers. Today, there are fewer of them. Pat Kisane is one of the survivors. The Carriage Works was one of York's biggest employers. More than 2,000 men worked here.
It was chaotic sometimes, with hundreds of people, really very busy. But it was quite exciting work. You never got tired, really, because you were concentrating so much on what you were doing, because it was fairly dangerous work, handling coaches, moving them. Yes, it was quite a dark place, was this, full of oil, grease up to their elbows, some of the workers. Very heavy work. We used to get hurt sometimes. A wire may part, and you may be unlucky to get caught by it. Some people might lose a finger end, things like that. Just accidents that happen in heavy engineering.
In 1995, York Carriage Works finally closed.
The friendship here and all the people that worked here worked really as though they lived in a village. Everyone knew everyone else. It's rather sad, really, to realise that nothing's happening here, and it should be a bustling, alive factory, this, definitely. Should be something that it isn't now.
In 1969, Flying Scotsman becomes a world traveller. Alan Pegler takes his pride and joy on tour in the USA.
Yes, well, loading at Liverpool to go across the Atlantic Ocean, I think I'm right in saying that the crane in question that they used had a name. I believe it was called the Mammoth, and the Mammoth lifted the locomotive from the rails of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board onto the deck of the ship. Nothing did break, fortunately, but there was certainly that worry. I've never forgotten the sight of the locomotive being swung out over the water to get onto the deck of the ship.
The Scotsman stays in America for 3 years. In summer, it travels from Boston to San Francisco. In winter, it's mothballed with the US Army.
I just thought it was too extraordinary an opportunity to let pass. So I just carried on, although I knew the money was running out and that I would eventually go bankrupt, but I did it quite deliberately. And I don't really regret it, I don't think, looking back.
When Alan Pegler runs out of money and the engine can't pay its bills, many fear the Flying Scotsman will never be released to return to Britain.
And I've read in the last few months the awful stories that some people have been printing about the curse of the Flying Scotsman. And as far as I'm concerned, it's been a blessing. I lost a huge amount of money over it, but what the hell, money's only money.
But another benefactor emerges. Sir William McAlpine buys the engine, clears its debts and brings it back to Britain. The Scotsman's story runs and runs. There's a trip to Australia and several seasons pulling Orient Express tours before it's snapped up by the National Railway Museum. Now, finally, the Scotsman is coming home to Yorkshire for good. At the opening of Railfest, there's an air of expectation and excitement. There's 200 years of railway history to experience. But there's no doubt what the people are really waiting to see.
It means a lot. 80 years, isn't it? It's been, yes. And it was always something special. Used to go through York Station.
But 300 yards away, the Scotsman's broken down with boiler problems. After successfully steaming all the way from London to Doncaster, it will have the minor indignity of being shunted into Railfest.
It's a beautiful engine, and but like any piece of mechanical equipment, it has its failures. And it's just having one at the most unfortunate time.
A wonderful day, yes, wonderful. Where she should have come 41 years ago.
You know, it came screaming up the East Coast main line, and just before getting here for its momentous entry, it broke down. I suppose, you know, somebody who runs Virgin Trains, I should be able to understand these things.
Yeah, we did well. We got it here. I told you we'd get it here.